You did not become cold. You became tired of begging warmth from the same place that kept making you shiver. You used to explain everything. You used to send the long message. You used to stay awake searching for the exact sentence that might make them finally understand what they had done. You used to believe that if you loved carefully enough, waited long enough, forgave deeply enough, the relationship would become safe. Now the message sits unanswered in your drafts. Now the phone rings, and your body does not rush toward it. Now the silence that once terrified you feels almost easier than another conversation where you carry both sides. And this is the part that confuses you. You are not heartless. You are exhausted. You are not detached because you never cared. You are detached because you cared for too long without being held. At first, you did not notice the change. It happened quietly. You stopped asking what was wrong. You stopped reading every shift in their voice. You stopped trying to repair the distance before they even admitted it was there. You stopped fighting for conversations they kept escaping. And because you spent so long being the one who reached, the moment you stopped reaching felt unnatural. It felt cruel. It felt like becoming them. But it was not the same. Their distance protected them from intimacy. Your distance protected you from another collapse. That distinction matters. You did not lose your capacity to love. You lost the capacity to keep bleeding in the same place and calling it patience. Most people call this giving up. Psychology calls it something more precise. Cumulative emotional overload is what happens when the nervous system carries more relational stress than it can keep processing. In plain English, your body does not shut down because nothing matters. It shuts down because too much has mattered for too long. That is why the change can feel sudden even when it took years. For a long time you remained available. You answered quickly. You explained softly. You anticipated their moods. You offered reassurance before asking for accountability. You forgave the silence because you understood their childhood. You excused the withdrawal because you knew they were overwhelmed. You carried their pain with such skill that nobody noticed yours was getting heavier. Not even you. You were the one who checked in. You were the one who restarted the conversation. You were the one who noticed the emotional weather before the storm arrived. You were the one who made the relationship feel more stable than it actually was. That is one of the hardest mirror lines to face. You did not stay because it felt good. You stayed because you had become responsible for making it survivable. And responsibility can feel like love when you learned early that connection depended on your effort. Maybe you were the child who sensed tension before anyone said a word. Maybe you knew from footsteps, a cabinet door, or the silence at dinner which version of the room you were walking into. Maybe you became easy to manage because the adults around you were already overwhelmed. Maybe you learned that your needs had to wait until everybody else was calm. A child in that environment makes a decision, not with words, with the body. The decision is simple. Keep the room stable and you might stay connected. That strategy made sense then. It was intelligent. It helped you survive emotional unpredictability without losing the people you needed. But when the same strategy enters adult love, you can mistake overfunctioning for devotion. You become the relationship's nervous system. You monitor, you soothe, you interpret, you repair, you carry. And then, one day, your body refuses the job. But here is what I have not told you yet. The numbness is not the beginning of the pattern. It is the final stage of a pattern that started with hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is the nervous system's habit of scanning for danger before danger becomes obvious. In plain English, you learn to notice distance early because distance once had consequences. A delayed reply, a flatter tone, a colder look, or a subtle withdrawal could change your entire internal state. Your body was not being dramatic. Your body was reading threat. Stephen Porges uses the term neuroception to describe how the nervous system evaluates safety and danger before conscious thought catches up. In plain English, your body can detect relational risk before your mind has formed a sentence. You feel the change before you can prove it. That is why you used to ask, "Are you okay?" That is why you used to ask again after they said nothing was wrong. That is why their silence made you search yourself for the mistake. You were trying to stop the abandonment before it arrived. But there is a cost to living in that state. The HPA axis helps coordinate the stress response through hormones including cortisol. In plain English, repeated uncertainty can keep your body braced for the next shift even during peaceful moments. You may look calm while your system is still standing guard. This is not weakness. This is a body that learned closeness could change without warning. This is not neediness. This is not the same as healthy sensitivity. Sensitivity notices. Hypervigilance takes responsibility. At first, that responsibility gave you a sense of control. If you noticed the shift early enough, maybe you could say the right thing. If you explained gently enough, maybe they would not withdraw. If you loved consistently enough, maybe consistency would return. That hope kept you moving. But unpredictable connection changes the brain. Intermittent reinforcement is the behavioral pattern created when reward arrives inconsistently. In plain English, occasional affection can keep you attached more powerfully than steady care because your system never knows when relief is coming. Some days they were warm. Some days they were unreachable. Some conversations felt intimate. Some conversations disappeared into silence. Some apologies sounded sincere. Some promises lasted only until the next discomfort. The inconsistency did not make you care less. It made you focus harder. Wolfram Schultz's work on reward prediction error helps explain why unpredictable reward captures attention. In plain English, the brain becomes highly alert when the outcome might change. The uncertainty keeps you emotionally invested because the next moment could finally bring the response you have been waiting for. That is why one soft message could reset weeks of pain. That is why one vulnerable night could convince you the relationship was changing. That is why one apology could keep you from naming the pattern. You were not only attached to the person, you were attached to the possibility. Stay with this, because the next part changes the meaning of your withdrawal. The first stage was pursuit. The second stage was explanation. The third stage was exhaustion. The fourth stage was silence. And silence can look like avoidance from the outside. But not all silence is the same. Deactivating strategies are often associated with avoidant attachment. They include minimizing emotional needs, suppressing vulnerability, and creating distance when closeness feels threatening. In plain English, some people withdraw because intimacy activates discomfort, but your silence may have a different origin. You are not pulling away because closeness is frightening. You are pulling away because closeness has repeatedly demanded self-abandonment. That is not the same thing. Avoidance says, I do not want to feel this. Exhaustion says, I cannot keep surviving this. For years, you may have carried a strange belief. If you stopped trying, everything would fall apart. And maybe that belief was not imaginary. Maybe the relationship only moved because you pushed it. Maybe contact only continued because you restarted it. Maybe conflict only resolved because you softened first. Maybe closeness only returned because you abandoned the point. That is why stopping feels like a test you never wanted to run. You do not want proof that your effort was holding everything together. Because if the relationship collapses the moment you stop carrying it, then the collapse tells the truth. The relationship was not stable. You were stabilizing it. The relationship was not reciprocal. You were compensating for the missing half. That is a painful realization. It changes the story from we had a difficult connection to I was doing the work of two people and calling the exhaustion love. The part most people never reach is coming. There is grief underneath the numbness. Deep grief. Not only for what happened, for who you became while trying to prevent it. You became more patient than you wanted to be, more careful than you needed to be, more understanding than the situation deserved. You became a translator for every silence, a defender of every mixed signal, a witness for the person who kept making you doubt what you witnessed. You understood their wounds so deeply that you stopped asking whether they understood yours. You became loyal to their potential and disloyal to your own pain. That sentence matters. You became loyal to their potential and disloyal to your own pain. This is why detachment can feel shameful. You remember how much empathy you once had. You remember how quickly you used to respond. You remember how much you wanted to help. And now, even when they reach for you, something in you stays still. You wonder if you have become cold. You have not. You have become unavailable for the version of love that required you to disappear. This is not punishment. This is not revenge. This is not a game. It is the nervous system refusing another unpaid shift. Social baseline theory, associated with James Cone, suggests that human beings are built to conserve energy through reliable connection. In plain English, safe relationships reduce the burden the body expects to carry alone. But when closeness repeatedly increases your workload instead of reducing it, the relationship stops functioning as a secure base. You stop resting in connection. You start recovering from it. You stop feeling met. You start feeling managed. You stop asking whether they care. You start asking why care always leaves you depleted. And eventually the system does what overwhelmed systems do. It reduces output. It narrows access. It shuts doors. This is adaptation, not failure. There is another childhood callback here. Maybe you were praised for being mature. Maybe you were the easy child, the understanding child, the child who did not ask for much, the child who could handle disappointment without making the room more difficult. That praise may have sounded like love, but the body heard a condition. You are safest when you need less. You are easiest to keep when you ask for less. You are lovable when your pain does not inconvenience anyone. So as an adult, you may stay too long in relationships where your needs remain secondary because the role feels familiar. You know how to be understanding. You know how to wait. You know how to forgive. You know how to make yourself smaller without calling it smallness. And then something breaks. Not loudly. Quietly, you stop reaching. You stop asking. You stop explaining. You stop imagining the conversation that will finally make them different. This is not because your heart disappeared. It is because your nervous system stopped believing repair was available. That is the moment the dynamic changes. For years, they may have trusted your return. They may have assumed you would text again. They may have assumed your empathy would reopen the door. They may have assumed your patience had no edge. They may have mistaken your capacity for permanence. But capacity is not consent. Empathy is not endless access. Understanding is not unlimited tolerance. And love is not the obligation to remain reachable while somebody rehearses the same wound on your body. The emotional climax is often this. The day they finally notice you are gone is the day you realize how long you had already been leaving. You left in pieces. The first piece left when they dismissed a pain you explained carefully. The second left when they returned only after you became quiet. The third left when you saw the pattern and apologized for seeing it. The fourth left when another promise sounded identical to the last one. The fifth left when you noticed you were calmer without contact than you were inside the relationship. And the final piece left without an announcement. No dramatic exit, no final paragraph, no courtroom speech, just silence. Because at some point, explaining becomes self-betrayal. That is the line. At some point, explaining becomes self-betrayal. Before that shift can happen, there is usually one more moment of confusion. They return, maybe gently, maybe with a familiar softness, maybe with the version of themselves you spent years waiting to see consistently. And for a second, your body remembers the old assignment. Explain, reassure, open the door, make the reunion easier for both of you. This is where the old pattern tries to survive, not through cruelty, through hope. Hope can be the most persuasive part of the cycle because it does not feel dangerous. It feels compassionate. It tells you that your exhaustion was temporary, that their return means the story has changed, and that refusing access would make you unfair. But a return is not the same as repair. A softer tone is not the same as accountability. Missing your emotional labor is not the same as becoming capable of reciprocity. Watch what happens when you do not rush to make the moment comfortable. Watch whether they become curious about your pain or impatient with your distance. Watch whether they can hold the consequences of the pattern without asking you to rescue them from those consequences. Because sometimes the clearest evidence arrives after you stop performing your old role. The relationship reveals what it was built on when you remove the labor that kept it standing. That truth can hurt, but it also ends the argument inside you. But here is the shift that matters. Detachment is not always the end of your ability to connect. Sometimes it is the beginning of your ability to stop confusing connection with pursuit. Neuroplasticity is the brain's capacity to change through repeated experience. In plain English, your nervous system can learn a new definition of closeness when the old one is no longer rewarded. The body can learn that peace does not have to be earned through emotional labor. At first, calm may feel empty. Consistency may feel flat. A person who answers directly may feel unfamiliar. A relationship without chasing may feel less intense. You may mistake the absence of anxiety for the absence of chemistry. That is common. The nervous system can confuse familiar activation with attraction. But intensity is not the same as intimacy. Relief is not the same as repair. Being needed is not the same as being loved. And being exhausted is not evidence that you tried deeply enough. Stay with this because the final distinction is the one that releases the shame. You did not become avoidant in the way you fear. You became protective. You learned distance because closeness stopped being safe. You learned silence because explanation stopped being heard. You learned stillness because pursuit stopped changing anything. And yes, some of those strategies can remain after the danger has passed. That is why understanding matters. Not so you can force yourself to open. Not so you can perform healing perfectly. So you can stop judging the part of you that closed the door. This part did not sabotage love. This part protected what was left of you. Earned secure attachment describes the possibility of developing greater relational safety even when early attachment was inconsistent. In plain English, your history can shape your instincts without controlling your future. You can learn to recognize care that does not require chasing, proof, or emotional overwork. The first change is not dramatic. It is quiet. You notice that someone else is upset, and you do not immediately abandon yourself to fix it. You notice distance, and you do not automatically assume it is your fault. You notice an unanswered message, and you do not spend the entire night trying to decode it. You notice the urge to over-explain, and you let the urge pass without turning it into a confession. You begin to understand that another person's discomfort is not always a fire you are required to enter. This is not selfishness. This is differentiation. You are allowed to remain connected without becoming responsible for every shift. You are allowed to care without carrying. You are allowed to notice silence without chasing it. You are allowed to stop auditioning for reciprocity. And you are allowed to grieve the version of yourself who worked so hard to be chosen. That version of you was not foolish. That version of you was loyal. That version of you was trying to create safety with the only tools they had. Do not shame that part. Thank it. It kept you alive inside emotional weather that never stayed predictable. But it does not need to run your life now. The job is over. You do not need another explanation. You do not need one more chance to prove how deeply you can understand someone who keeps refusing to understand you. You do not need to return to the same room to prove you are compassionate. You do not need to reopen the wound to prove you have healed. Some doors close because your body finally believes you. Some silences are not avoidance. They are the sound of your nervous system choosing peace. You did not stop loving. You stopped abandoning yourself. And that changes everything.